Fellas, we need to talk about Spider-Man. Sorry, not this Spider-Man. I've beaten Marvel's Spider-Man like 3 times. As a Webhead fan, I absolutely love that game. The second one, though, made me want to install League of Legends and queue up for a ranked match. Can it really get worse than that? So, while we Spider-Man fans wait God knows how many years for the third game to come out, hoping the story somehow gets good again, I decided to create a story for what I consider a clean Spider-Man trilogy. So come with me, because we've got a lot of ideas to go absolutely insane with today. We've got 3 missions for this trilogy. 1, make a proper adaptation of the characters and what makes them who they are. 2, create a good story by mixing concepts that are already established in this universe with some new ideas, so we can actually have that little factor of surprise. And 3, well, I'm gonna save number 3 for a little later in the video. You'll have to stick around for that one. Let's nail down the gameplay. It's not going to be some crazy overhaul because I think Insomniac already nailed it pretty well in both games. I'd bump the difficulty up just a little bit, since even on the hardest settings, the Spidey games are pretty easy. Maybe throw in an extra layer of complexity too, with more combos and different attack types, just so it's not literally the exact same gameplay. The web mechanics in combat would stay pretty similar too, giving players plenty of room to get creative and actually use the environment to your advantage. The upgrade and suit unlock system would be the real cherry on top of the gameplay. Instead of your XP just filling up a generic level bar, our Spidey would actually evolve and improve his skills based on how many crimes he manages to stop. The idea is to make you actually feel the webhead getting better the more he operates around the city. As for the suits, I'd want a way more interactive creation system than what Insomniac's games offer. First, the player unlocks a bunch of iconic Spider-Man suits by finding them around the map or beating specific enemies. Say each iconic villain drops, among other things, a classic suit. After that, the player could lightly customize that suit too, tweaking things like colors, the texture, the mask lenses. The downside is that this could obviously make the character look completely ridiculous if you give players too much freedom. But that's already possible in the games we have. I mean, just look at this shit. On the other hand, it would give players a ton of customization options. And there are plenty of people, myself included, who absolutely love that kind of stuff. Another cool mechanic would be side missions. Naturally, the games would have a main story with a main villain, character arcs, all that, but that comes with a problem. Spider-Man's a character with over 60 years of comic history. The guy's got an absolutely insane rogues gallery, and you simply can't cram every single one of them into one good story. That's where side quests come in. As the campaign goes on, new villains would keep popping up around New York, even without being part of the main plot. Each one would get its own smaller story, with one or a few quests that build up to a genuinely badass, unique boss fight, different from the last. This lets us bring in a ton of characters, which not only gives this New York more life, but also creates that organic, living world feel you get from the comics or the cartoons, where villains cycle in and out constantly, getting beaten, locked up, breaking out, coming back, disappearing for a while, and so on. Now boys, let's imagine the perfect story for these games. Starting from the beginning, I really like Peter's early career. I think it's extremely important for his character arc that we actually get to see his entire progression, from a teenager in high school to starting college, and then becoming a completely broke, miserable, limping through life wreck trying to pay his rent. You know, the basic Peter Parker experience. And if we're building the perfect games, I think we have poetic license to ignore the fact that Peter's origin has already been adapted literally everywhere, and at this point, even your 8-year-old niece who can barely eat without supervision has probably seen it on TikTok or something. I want players to finish these 3 games having the complete, absolute, definitive experience of being literally Peter Parker. And Spider-Man, of course. Unlike the Spidey who's already online for 8 years at the beginning of Marvel's Spider-Man, our first game starts with a 16-year-old Peter. But to avoid putting everyone into a coma from boredom, as much as I would love to, we can't start the game with Pete's school life. You guys would drop the game in the first hour, I know you would. Even the beginning of Red Dead Redemption 2, which I don't think is that slow, is enough to make a lot of people complain. So, instead, we jump straight into the game with Spidey hunting down Uncle Ben's killer. which, at this point, is probably the most hated man in New York for the unforgivable crime of creating the Spider-Man we know. Picture that gorgeous as hell opening scene from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but instead of that friendly, sunny, feel-good vibe, we're in a hostile New York in the dead of night, sometime in the 2000s. Yeah, my ideal Spider-Man is set in the 2000s, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. I don't know if it's nostalgia or just me being attached to that era, but I think it's going to give the games way more aesthetic identity. Not to mention, I genuinely love a bunch of stuff that defined that period. Take the classic Daily Bugle dynamic, for example, with Peter having to actually take photos for the newspaper. That, along with a bunch of other stuff, would have to change if the story was set today. And also, I don't think anyone can stomach another gadget-obsessed, high-tech Spidey right now. I like it too, don't get me wrong, but does it always have to be that? Anyway, moving on. You start swinging through the city with the greatest web-swinging gameplay the world has ever seen, while having a few different movement options to explore New York. The animations, though, should be a little clunky and awkward at first, but gradually become smoother, crazier, and more acrobatic as the game goes on. This kid is just starting out after all. This is the first time Peter sees the streets of New York from above, in the dead of night, in a full-on aggressive, uncomfortable headspace, driven purely by revenge. He keeps hunting for the guy, in a stretch that also works as the game's tutorial, teaching the various mechanics the way you'd expect. But it's all about pacing here, so this tutorial can't be slow or break the flow of a game that's designed to hook the player within that very first hour. Eventually, Spidey finds the guy, and just as he's about to beat him within an inch of his life and send him off to meet Mephisto, he sees a familiar face. Our boy instantly locks up, in total shock. He obviously drops the whole revenge thing and just arrests the guy, and that's where the prologue ends. The important thing here is that this first game only drops a few mentions of Uncle Ben's death. No flashbacks, no dramatic cutscenes, nothing. We're saving that story for the second game. Trust the plan, fellas. After that, we're introduced to Peter's world, showing Midtown High and all the people around him, including his love interest, Gwen Stacy. AKA the best Peter Parker romance, and I'm still depressed that she's becoming more associated with Miles now. During this school section, the player gets introduced to Gwen, Harry, Flash, Liz, Aunt May, and a few other lesser-known characters like Sally, Kenny, Randy. The idea here is to create a really populated and dynamic group of characters around Peter, making the world feel like there are actually people living in it. Something similar to what the Spectacular Spider-Man did incredibly well. Boy, this cartoon was so banger. Even though the gameplay priority is obviously still Spidey, this core cast would still matter a lot to the story. With its own character development, romance, and dilemmas our boy Pete has to work through. One of this first game's themes would be how hard it is to juggle Spider-Man's life with Peter Parker's. Sure, maybe that's kind of a played-out theme now with the new movie also digging into it, but remember, in this reality you haven't watched Brand New Day yet, so you wouldn't be thinking that. And I totally didn't want to go further with this part and build a whole bully-inspired high school gameplay layer. Definitely not. I would absolutely hate a gameplay section like that, exploring this side of the character with quests, some awesome exploration, and a bunch of activities to interact with the other characters and enrich the story. I would absolutely hate something like that in a Spider-Man game. Yeah, I know that might look kinda off, so I'm not going to say it'd actually be part of the trilogy we're building here, but just know I wanted it. Is that too crazy? Now, as for the Spidey side of things, picking the main villain for this game can be a little tricky. We don't want to burn through our biggest villains right out of the gate and lose potential for a climax in the next games. But we also can't just throw in some random B-tier villain nobody gives a shit about. I think the perfect balance between those two options is none other than Norman Osborn. But not the Green Goblin. I'm talking about Norman as an extremely cold, calculating, intelligent guy who, after seeing Spidey in action, decides he wants control over his own group of superhumans. Hear me out, fellas. Our evil genius puts together the illustrious six-villain group known as the Sinister Six, but with a pretty different approach from what you're used to. His plan is to build up his public image and use that to grab power and control over the city. To do that, he assembles a group of remarkable people who'll pose as superheroes, except these remarkable people are also completely dysfunctional and morally questionable, not to mention literally criminals. Let's name names. Electro, Rhino, Sandman, Vulture, Mysterio, and Octopus. All of them have their own reasons for wanting to be seen as heroes, but obviously they aren't, which makes them perfect for what Norman is trying to accomplish. Otto's got this whole business partner relationship with Norman, so he basically ends up as the leader of the sextet, at least until he eventually starts building up resentment and hatred toward the businessman. At first, this plan is going to look beautiful from Osborn's side, still pulling every string from the shadows. Through Oscorp, he funds the experiments that give this crew their powers, and at first, they genuinely act like heroes, saving people, even stopping crimes that Norman himself orchestrated behind the scenes. In other words, we're adapting the Dark Avengers concept, but inside the Spidey universe with the Sinister Six, which gives a way richer extra layer to a group that usually just shows up as a bunch of chaotic villains. Seeing his subordinate's success, Osborn publicly announces himself as the leader of these heroes. And hey, drop in the comments what name you'd think is cool for this group, since Sinister Six probably doesn't make sense for a bunch of supposed heroes. Anyway, he kicks off a movement to regulate people like Spidey, which absolutely destroys Spider-Man's public image. Since he hides his identity, Norman gets to manipulate the masses into hating masked vigilantes. This creates a whole dilemma in Pete's life, who was already a mess trying to balance his hero life with his personal one, constantly letting down his friends and Aunt May. Because of that, he starts considering revealing his identity. After all, he's watching a group of heroes that genuinely seem to do good. Torn on the decision, he decides to ask Gwen what she thinks, since she's the only one who knows his secret by accidentally seeing him. Thing is, before he even gets an answer to that dilemma, as Spidey, he catches the sextet actually messing up, and realizes they're not so heroic after all. Trying to stop them, he ends up plastered across every headline as the villain, and that's where our beloved J. Jonah Jameson's eternal witch hunt against him kicks off. To keep this brief, since we've still got 2 more games ahead of us, eventually the group obviously spirals out of Osborn's control and starts causing chaos across the city. And that becomes the climax and final battle. I really wanted to spend some time here imagining what Mysterio's boss fight could look like, or Electro's. The real goal would be making every enemy feel unique instead of just another quick-time event sequence. So that's the recipe for the first game of our trilogy. This would be Peter's Midtown High arc, with the essential elements being his romance with Gwen, which yes, would have a happy ending. The world needs to stop making poor Gwen suffer. The friendship development with all those characters, but especially Harry, would also matter a lot here. Peter struggling with his social life because of his responsibilities as Spider-Man, Aunt May worried sick, and of course, that whole Norman situation I just walked you through. Obviously, Norman walks away scot-free, dodging any responsibility for what his group did, only losing his Regulated Heroes initiative. At the end, the credits roll over an amazing song, showing glimpses of the next 2 years of Peter's life. We see him living a happy romance with Gwen, hanging out with his friends, the whole gang eventually graduating, just seeing Peter actually get to enjoy being a teenager for once, before finally closing out with a tease for the next game, which is exactly where we're headed next. Fellas, this is going to be the best Venom arc adaptation ever made. And you know why? Because we're going to take inspiration from the best Venom arc adaptation ever made, the spectacular Spider-Man one. But we're going to send Pete even further down the rabbit hole.
Poor Peter Parker.
The second game's story is going to be way more emotional than the first one's. Sure, you can pull that off with any villain, but I think the 2 best ones for that goal are Venom himself and the Green Goblin. Yeah, we're burning 2 of the Webhead's most iconic villains for this one game, but trust me, it's gonna be worth it. Unlike the last one, our second game kicks off in a sunny, happy New York, with Spidey already pretty popular with the public. Yeah, just not with him, obviously. Our 18-year-old Peter just graduated and is about to start college alongside Gwen and Harry. Right in the very first gameplay session, you get a call from a renowned Dr. Connors asking for your help investigating this newly discovered alien life form. Peter's absolutely hyped and heads over. When he gets there, Gwen's already on site since she works full-time at the lab, while Peter's more of an enthusiast who shows up whenever he's got time. This opening sequence serves to, first, get the symbiote in contact with Peter, and second, it starts showing us that something is wrong with Dr. Connors. We'll eventually find out that he's already been experimenting on himself. Right after, while Spidey's suit hasn't even changed yet, we get the introduction of the Green Goblin terrorizing the city.
Spider-Man, come out to play.
Our little Norman's back, and this time smarter, insane, and with actual powers. The The start of the game has 2 missions. 1, show that Peter's more confident than ever, and this whole symbiote process is only going to amplify that confidence and strength. We'll see a Spidey taking down tough villains one after another, idolized by the whole city, living the peak of his romance with Gwen. All this before he starts turning into full Bully Maguire mode. Speaking of the love of his life, that's mission 2, giving Gwen real narrative weight. Remember when I said she didn't deserve to suffer in yet another universe? Well, we need to talk. You have no idea how much this hurts me, fellas, but yes, we're going through the death of Gwen Stacy here, in the most brutal, emotional, devastating way possible, at the Green Goblin's hands. Think of the fictional character you hate most, like ever. Our mission here is to build this arc in a way that makes us, and Peter, hate the Green Goblin so much that all we want to see is Peter in that badass symbiote suit making him suffer. And my friends, that's gonna have a payoff. In an ideal world, the catharsis would match or beat that one scene in Game of Thrones. Or that one. Or that one. I want to do what The Last of Us 2 missed its chance to do. Actually give players that rewarding payoff moment. And that's where the cherry on top comes in, Venom. Spidey's gonna be drowning in hatred, and I'm a huge fan of taking that all the way, showing him in a state no adaptation has ever dared to show. It's gonna be the only moment in the entire trilogy where he stops cracking jokes and gets dead serious. He'll be more violent, ruthless, more sadistic, more anti-hero. Almost like an 8-legged Frank Castle, he hunts the Green Goblin through every corner of the city until he finds him, running over anyone who gets in the way in the process. Then he beats him so bad, the guy's one punch away from getting smoked. It's gonna be like when he did this to Kingpin, but here with the symbiote making it worse. As far as I know, this would be the closest he's ever come to actually taking someone's life, not counting the time someone else was controlling Pete's body. Realizing he's about to cross a line he can't come back from, he stops and has a deeply emotional moment reflecting on Uncle Ben, then on Gwen, and lands on the conclusion that she wouldn't want this, so he bails. I haven't mentioned this, but by this point in the story, he's already pushed everyone away and realized it's the symbiote influencing him and all that, so we go straight into that classic church scene. Except we're going to cook it up in a way that's way more emotional for anyone who loves the character. Remember how in the first game I chose not to show Uncle Ben's story? That was to save it for this exact moment. Venom keeps tempting Peter more and more to embrace that side, and Peter listens, up to a point. After all, it's what helped him get his revenge for Gwen. But right at that moment, we get a deeply emotional sequence of Pete's history with Uncle Ben, from childhood all the way to the day of the murder. We hear that one of the greatest quotes ever. And that snaps Peter back, finally casting the symbiote off for good. Like I said, inspired by that cartoon that pulled this off masterfully. That marks the first half of the game. I held off mentioning this to prioritize the storytelling, but by this point, Peter's already crossed paths with Eddie Brock, who in this version is Peter's college classmate at ESU, along with Mary Jane and Harry, and Gwen herself before the tragedy. We'll get to see this college core of Peter's, yeah, mainly to show off more of his scientist side, but it won't get nearly as much focus as the last game's Midtown cast did. Another important person Spidey ran into was Black Cat, who was already into him since their first meeting, but the boy had a mission. And Gwen had been pretty recent too, but don't worry, this is going to be the game for the Felicia Hardy fans. Even though there's already some noticeable chemistry between Pete and MJ, the pairing going forward is Felicia. I feel like our Black Cat deserves a little love, since no movie has really given a shit about the character so far. The gameplay would lean into that too, having the two of them team up in some really fun missions and fights. Spider-Man and Black Cat working together, bouncing off each other during combat, even having some unique duo mechanics. The second half of the game kicks in after a small time skip of a few months. Venom's already active, and this is also where we reintroduce that rotating enemy system from the first game. Oh, and this part is also the origin of Harry's hatred for Spider-Man, who crippled his dad and threw him in prison. Most of the conflict revolves around Venom knowing that Peter is Spider-Man, so he makes the poor guy's life a living hell, almost killing Aunt May in the process. This version of Venom is going to be seriously strong, so Black Cat's help is more than welcome to finally put an end to the alien. We're even getting some proper gameplay playing as her occasionally. At the climax of this whole story, Harry and MJ end up finding out Peter is the Spider-Man because of Venom, who comes dangerously close to killing them while taunting Spidey, telling him he's about to lose people again, but this time he won't be able to stop it, because alone, he's weak. That's exactly the motivation our hero needs to unload on Venom and save his friends' lives. And that would be the second game of the trilogy, ending on a pretty somber note, with Peter still grieving Gwen, Harry completely MIA, hating him after finding out his identity, and Black Cat walking away, clearing the path for MJ in the next game. We open after a time skip of a few years. Pete's already in his mid-20s, fresh out of college, struggling to pay rent on his apartment. This game would even have a full gameplay mechanic letting you take your own photos for the Daily Bugle while you're out fighting in the street. And I'm not talking about the photo mode, that's been there since the first game. I'm talking about actually letting the player participate in the process. You choose where to place the camera. Then you fight, swing, dodge, and perform whatever moves you want to create the photos you want, from whatever angle you want. Is it necessary? Probably not, but it'd be a cool little detail in addition. Another important part of Pete's personal life is going to be his relationship with MJ. At the start of the game, they're close friends, with him supporting, or trying to, her acting career. The original idea was to just start the game with them already dating, but I figure a lot of people would enjoy watching that development play out on screen. So instead, they slowly grow closer and closer until they finally get together. As someone who despises any of these adaptations of Mary Jane, I'd aim for something different with her. We keep her core traits. She's confident in herself, she wants to be an actress, she has that natural charisma and beauty. But I want to build a character that's genuinely funny, charming, and someone the player actually gets excited to see whenever she shows up. Now, as for the villain, this is where things get interesting. The first act of the game centers on the Fisk threat, running the city from the shadows without anyone even knowing the man exists. This is going to be Spidey's biggest challenge yet, since it's not something he can just punch his way through, at least not until he uncovers the chubby bald guy behind it all. This is where he meets DeWolf, the only person he can actually trust through this whole plot. Outside of that, it's a full Spider-Man going rogue situation, having to operate without trusting Fisk's bought-off police force, or anyone else really. The resolution starts when Kingpin needs to hire someone strong enough to deal with the growing headache Spidey's become. And I've got one very specific mercenary in mind for the job. Fellas, there's no duo in Marvel I love seeing in action more than Spider-Man and Deadpool. Seeing the two of them play off each other is just incredible. That duo just works. Fisk hires him, and Wade initially takes the job like any other, which leads us into a genuinely badass boss fight between Spidey and Deadpool. As the fight goes on, you can already picture the two of them talking a mile a minute the whole time, and that conversation makes Wade grow pretty fond of the webhead, eventually making him drop the job entirely, clearing the path straight to Fisk. Not to mention the fourth wall break, the mercenary could, for example, ask you, this cute person watching right now, to drop a like on the video and subscribe to help this baby channel keep bringing you videos. Totally free, and you'd be making both our boy Deadpool and our boy Spidey happy. From the second act on, the idea is to build a genuinely chaotic New York in Kingpin's absence, almost post-apocalyptic, with gang wars and every criminal fighting over the streets as the city falls apart. To make the most of that chaos, we bring Harry Osborn back into the story, now as the new Goblin. He becomes one of the main causes of all this mess. Obviously, this escalates gradually until it reaches a point where Spider-Man alone can't handle it, given the absurd amount of crime happening all at once. That's when our immortal anti-hero comes back into the picture and teams up with the Webhead to help save the city. The whole final stretch is a massive fan service moment of Spidey and Deadpool being the most iconic duo, all building toward a plan to take down the city's crime bosses and villains one by one, ranging from Hammerhead and Tombstone to some of the classic, more well-known enemies Spidey's captured before, but who managed to slip away. And finally, we just need to wrap up Harry's arc, which plays out in a cinematic, cathartic fight between him and Spider-Man. After getting beat down enough to come to his senses, Harry redeems himself and voluntarily checks himself in to get psychological treatment for the Goblin formula. Spidey ends up celebrated by the whole city, partying harder than when the Knicks won the NBA this year. He basically becomes the symbol of the city, even getting JJJ, who spent 3 straight games trashing him non-stop, to finally give him a compliment. Once, at least. And to properly close out the trilogy, we end with Pete taking MJ on a web swing through the city. The two of them eventually land on top of the Empire State Building, looking over New York together. In this moment, Peter has a conversation with her that transitions us into a small flashback. showing him as Spidey inside a fancy, slightly futuristic office. We hear a voice talking to him, and as the camera slowly zooms out, it's revealed to be none other than Nick Fury, complimenting the man for saving New York and inviting him to the Avengers Initiative. The credits roll without showing Pete's answer, and this time no post-credits scene either. Just Spider-Man, standing at the top of the Empire State Building with MJ, looking over the city he spent 3 games trying to protect. And that's my dream trilogy for a Spider-Man video game series, boys. Obviously, there would be a lot more stuff that I couldn't possibly fit into one video, but that pretty much sums up the main ideas and the directions I'd take the story. As for the goals I set at the start of the video, for the first one, I believe I captured everyone's essence pretty well. For the second, I aimed at adapting some great comic storylines, like the Dark Avengers, the Symbiote Saga, or the death of Gwen Stacy, but always trying to bring something new, or a twist that sets this version apart from the original, without losing that essence, so it wouldn't get in the way of goal number 1. And remember I mentioned there was a third mission? Yeah, mission number 3 was always about giving the secondary characters of Spider-Man's world the justice practically no adaptation has given them so far. MJ, probably the character who deserves a better adaptation the most, is the most charismatic person in the whole cast. Black Cat finally gets the love no movie ever gave her. And even Harry, who almost always just gets thrown away as a villain or an unlikable character, gets a great redemption. If you liked what I did with these characters, it's because Mission 3 worked. Did you enjoy this hypothetical trilogy? Drop a comment with what you'd change. Whatever you always wanted to see in a Spider-Man game. I like reading the unhinged stuff you guys comment sometimes.
I can't see the cars.
Okay, back up, guys. You can't see the cars.
They got the fuck out of the way. I can't see. There are cars there, motherfucker. Get out of the way.